If your soup has no salt, then you don't deserve to exist. That sentence, followed by the sound of a shattering bowl, marked the beginning of the worst night of my life. My name is Helena Ward. I am 63 years old, and last night my own son beat me until I bled over a tasteless meal. While the sting of the split on my lip had not yet dried, I was crawling on the floor, reaching for an old rag by the sink to wipe away the dark red streaks from the tile. Each time I wiped, the blood spread further, and I caught myself thinking, so my blood is as bland as my soup. Lucas, the only son I had spent my whole life raising, walked straight into his room and closed the door softly as if nothing had happened. No apology, no shame. Only the quiet click of a door sealing shut, clean and cold, leaving behind a silence so heavy it made me feel like an extra piece of furniture in my own home. This morning I still got up at 5, just as I had for the past 40 years. Habit was the only thing that reminded me I was still alive. I brewed mint tea, pulled open the curtains, and let the first light spill through the window, falling across the oak dining table my husband had built by hand in 1983. But the light today wasn't warm. It revealed everything: the blue bruise on my wrist, the split lip, and the shadow of a woman who had forgotten how to look straight into a mirror. Lucas was already sitting at the kitchen table, dressed neatly in a gray suit and a deep red tie. He was scrolling through his phone, not bothering to look up when he said flatly, "Breakfast, hurry! I have a meeting at 7:30. I stood behind the counter, my hands trembling as I cracked the eggs. Scrambled eggs with 3 spoons of grated cheese, 2 slices of toast, and black coffee without sugar. Every move was measured precisely, like defusing a bomb, because one wrong detail, too bland, too overcooked, or a single drop of coffee on the plate could trigger his rage. And when Lucas exploded, I was the one who paid for it. When I set the plate in front of him, he still didn't look up. Only the sound of metal against porcelain and the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, ticking like the wall clock. Then came the sound of a key turning. Camille, his wife, walked in, wrapped in a turquoise silk robe, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor like the countdown of a verdict. "Good morning, Mrs. Ward," she said, her smile sweet but hollow. "Did you sleep well?" I wanted to tell her I slept on the cold kitchen floor, with a bleeding lip and shaking hands, but instead I smiled. "Thank you, dear. I did." Camille kissed Lucas on the cheek, just enough to show off her diamond ring. She sat down, opened her purse, and reapplied her lipstick. Her perfume mixed with the scent of coffee and the metallic tang of dried blood in the air, making me want to gag. "Would you like some coffee, Mrs. Ward?" she asked, her voice sweet as honey laced with poison. "No, thank you." Lucas put his knife down, finally looked up, and his eyes were so cold they froze the air in that small kitchen. Then he smiled. Only outsiders would believe it was kind. "Ah, Mother, I bought this for you yesterday." He placed a gold-cased foundation compact on the table. "Try it. It'll cover those scratches from when you fell last night." I looked at the box and smiled faintly. He probably used money from my retirement, the one he's been managing for me for the past 2 years. Fell, such a polite word for a punch. My voice sounded so small it barely felt like mine. "Thank you, son." Camille glanced over, smiling with admiration. "You're always so thoughtful. Always thinking of your mom." I lowered my gaze. If she knew those scratches came from her husband's fists, she'd probably still say, "You're so strong, honey. Teaching your mom some discipline." Lucas stood up and tightened his tie. As he bent to pick up his briefcase, he leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "Remember what I said last night? One word, and you'll wish you were dead." Then he straightened up, his perfect smile snapping back into place for Camille. "Let's go, darling. Don't want to be late." The sleek black sedan rolled off Magnolia Lane, leaving behind the smell of fresh gasoline and the crunch of tires over the sound of money and power, the very things I once thought I'd given my son the chance to have. The house fell silent again. I sat down, staring into the emptiness. On the table, the gold compact still shimmered cold and gleaming like a velvet-wrapped trap. I opened it. The expensive perfume filled the air, drowning out the iron scent. I dabbed a thin layer on my cheek, covering the bruise, which was turning purple. The foundation was smooth, flawless. I told myself, Now I look just like a mother loved by her son. But when I look deeper into the mirror, the eyes staring back refused to cooperate. They trembled, hollowed out, as if whispering, "Stop covering. No makeup can hide humiliation." I turned away, walking toward the window. Outside, the gardenias I had planted when Lucas was little were blooming white and quiet. Back then, I told him, "You know, gardenias bloom even when people forget to water them." Now I realize I am that garden, trying to bloom despite neglect, trying to stand despite the wind. I poured another cup of mint tea, sat at the table, and watched the clock strike 6:30. Time kept moving, indifferent to the fact that my son had turned his mother into an invisible thing inside her own home. And maybe, if it weren't for the phone call that came that morning, I would have kept living like that, silent, invisible, scrubbing blood and cooking meals until my last breath. The phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen. "Mrs. Ward? I'm calling from Arden and Rowe Holdings, where your son works. We need to see you today. There are some discrepancies in the financial records we think you should know about." I froze. The teacup slipped from my hand, hot liquid spreading across the table. A strange warmth rose through my chest, not fear, but something like a faint awakening. I didn't know then that this one small phone call would open the door to an entirely different life. If you're still listening now, maybe you know what it feels like to be invisible in your own home. But sometimes, the moment you hit the bottom of humiliation is exactly when the first wave of awakening begins. I am Helena Ward. And this was only the beginning. Next, Part 2, 40 Years at Hartwell and Pierce, where the calm past begins to crack and the seeds of tragedy show they were planted long ago. Stay with me. Everything is about to unfold. I joined Hartwell and Pierce LLP in the fall of 1984, when my hair was still a deep chestnut and my pointed leather shoes still rubbed blisters from chasing the number 3 bus every morning. Back then, I was just a probationary secretary sitting behind a dark wooden desk next to the records room, with a beige IBM typewriter in front of me and a stack of files so high my shoulders often went numb. I remember the smell of fresh paper, the warmth of a stapler right after it clicked, and the crisp little ding of the desk clock each time the minute hand touched the mark. I even remember the strange joy I felt when I was handed an old Mont Blanc fountain pen from the shared supply cabinet, the first object in my life that made me feel like I belonged somewhere important. I started my career with a simple rule: be on time, do it right, spell it perfectly. I could type 10 fingers without looking, align a legal letter down to the millimeter, and memorize 4 partners' schedules just by overhearing them talk in the hallway. People used to say, "A good secretary turns chaos into silence." I lived by that for 40 years, gathering fallen pages, arranging every sentence neatly, and giving others the peace I rarely had myself. I met Walter, the man who would later build my oak dining table, on a rainy afternoon. He was standing under the awning of the office building, his shirt soaked through, holding a wind-bent umbrella. He looked up and smiled. "Would you mind sharing half the shelter?" I laughed and stepped aside. His shoes were drenched, but his eyes were as warm as the yellow streetlights behind him. Walter wasn't rich, and he promised nothing but a gentle laugh and a reminder to bring a coat when the sky turns gray. We married quietly, with just a bunch of daisies and 2 cups of tea. A year later, Lucas was born. In the old photo hanging in the hallway, there's a baby wrapped in a butter-yellow blanket, lips pursed, while I smile foolishly like every first-time mother. Walter died young from heart disease when Lucas was 8. Since then, the house had only 2 people: my son and a space where a man once built kitchen tables with steady hands. I wasn't wealthy, but I was careful. And Hartwell and Pierce became the road I walked through every storm. I woke at 5, dropped Lucas off at school, arrived at the office before 8:30, left when the sky turned violet, and went home to cook. At night, I would review documents, aligning every page as if straightening the branch of a young tree. I never learned to say no, especially not to my son. I enrolled Lucas in piano lessons, but he quit after 8 months, calling it boring. I bought him trendy basketball shoes, the jacket he wanted, and the backpack I had to pay off in installments. I believed that if my child had everything he wished for, he would learn gratitude. Maybe I was wrong. Some children grow up surrounded by gifts and come to believe that love, too, is something they can demand. My years at Hartwell and Pierce taught me one thing: even the truth needs careful presentation. One day, Mrs. Pierce placed a thick folder in front of me, her expression stern. "Helena, remember, only keep what's truly necessary. The press tends to misunderstand." I nodded. And I did as told. That day, I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. I simply thought, I'm following procedure. It took me many years to understand that procedure is sometimes just a polite word for hiding what people don't want seen. In that room filled with documents, I accidentally learned how to conceal a skill I would later use to hide my own bruises. I bought the house in Mount Pleasant when Lucas was in his final year of college, using every dollar I had saved over 30 years. When I received the keys, my hands shook so much I nearly dropped them. For the first time, I had a home of my own. I painted the kitchen cream, planted a row of gardenias by the porch, patched the wallpaper, and hung Walter's photo in the living room. I thought that house would be the end of the journey, a quiet place to sip mint tea, play soft music, and let life drift peacefully by. I never imagined it would one day become my prison. Lucas graduated, got a job, and married. I felt proud watching him stand in the wedding hall, red tie shining, smile confident. I thought, finally I did it. But happiness is sometimes just the pause between two storms. 3 years ago, Lucas got divorced. One afternoon, he stood at my door with a black suitcase, a wrinkled shirt, and tired eyes. "Mom, can I stay? Just a few weeks?" Mothers my age don't know how to close doors. I opened mine wide, and my heart too. A few weeks became a few months, then years. At first, it was gentle. He woke early, went to work, and came home for dinner. I felt warm inside, thinking I had my companion back, but soon he began to control. "Mom, let me help manage your money. Older people shouldn't hold too much cash." I nodded. "Mom, let me add my name to the deed, just in case something happens." I nodded again. And just like that, I signed myself into dependence. Then came the commands. "This dinner's bland. The room's dirty, clean it again. Your shirt's wrinkled, you look sloppy." I laughed it off, thinking he was just stressed. I made excuses for him the way people shield a withered flower from the sundae until the insults turned into the first slap. I still remember that night when the bowl of vegetable soup spilled onto the floor and Lucas screamed about too little salt. As I knelt to clean, the smell of blood mixed with soup, and in that moment, I realized something. Violence doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it comes from the very child you once cradled. After that night, I lived in fear. Every footstep in the hallway made my heart jump. I learned to read his moods by the sound of the door closing, to brew his coffee just strong enough to avoid another scolding. I stayed silent, and silence slowly became a habit. This morning, after the call from Arden and Rowe Holdings, I stood by the sink for a long time, my hands still wet with soap. They said there were discrepancies in the financial records and that they needed to meet with me this afternoon. I didn't know what it was about, but my instincts whispered something was about to break. I pinned the appointment note to the fridge, glanced at the gardenias outside swaying softly in the breeze. Their scent was sweet but sharp, like the smell of an ending and a beginning all at once. I dried my hands, put on a dark coat, and tied my hair neatly. As I stepped out, my shadow stretched across the tile floor thin but straight. I suddenly remembered what Mrs. Bass Place. Pierce once told me, "Helena, you have eyes that can see the sentence before it's written." Maybe it's time I read my own story from the start, with the truth. One layer of foundation can't hide it, one reflection in the mirror can't lie anymore, and the meeting on the 18th floor will uncover secrets that could change everything. If you've ever hidden your pain to protect someone else, stay with me. The next part will show you why the truth always finds its way back. That morning, as I looked in the mirror, I realized the foundation could not hide the bruise on my neck. The slant of light from the window made the purple mark even clearer. I added more powder, but the more I did, the more useless it felt. What I was covering was not just a wound, but fear. In the mirror, my eyes looked unfamiliar. When I was young, they were bright and steady. Now there was only the weariness of someone used to living in silence. I whispered to myself, "It's okay, Helena. It's just an appointment." I did not believe it. Outside on the porch, the gardenias gave off a heady scent, tinged with bitterness. I stepped out the door, the morning wind threading through my hair, the smell of coffee mixing with the mist, pulling me back to the years I had lost. I took the number 3 bus, the route I had ridden for 40 years to Hartwell and Pierce. Today it was the same road, but I felt different, trembling and clear-eyed at the same time. The Arden and Rowe Holdings building rose over the avenue, its glass reflecting a sky so clear it hurt to look at. I walked across the marble-floored lobby where everyone moved quickly, eyes fixed straight ahead. A receptionist smiled. "Mrs. Davis, accounting is expecting you on the 18th floor." The elevator moved slowly. The number 18 lit up like a racing heartbeat. I remembered when Lucas turned 18, and I gave him his first watch. He smiled and said, "I'll make you proud." I believed him. I always believed, even now. The doors opened onto a gray-carpeted hallway, so quiet it chilled me. A middle-aged man greeted me, striped tie, gentle voice. "I'm Adrian Castillo, chief accountant. Please come in, Mrs. Davis." The small meeting room with the smell of new paper and harsh white light made me feel as if I were in a courtroom. Adrian flipped open a thick file, his voice even. "We discovered several transfers from the company account to your personal account. A total of more than $52,000 over the past 6 months. I went numb. That's impossible. I don't know anything about this. My son manages my account. I just sign when he says it's a formality." Adrian nodded, his eyes without judgment. "We understand. That's why we asked you to come. But if you want to prove you're not involved, you need to sign a statement and file a complaint." He slid a stack of statements toward me. The cold numbers ran on, and at the bottom the electronic signature, Helena Davis, showed clearly. I did not remember what I had signed. It might have been the day Lucas said, "Mom, sign quickly, I'm in a hurry." In that moment I saw one truth clearly. I had let trust become the rope that bound me. Adrian spoke softly. "You should get a lawyer, I believe you, but the truth needs to be written down." I nodded, thanked him, and stood up. As the door opened, I saw Evelyn, my younger sister, standing at the end of the hall. She wore a beige work dress and held a stack of documents. When our eyes met, my throat tightened. She hurried over and whispered, "I work here. When I saw your name on the schedule, I knew something was wrong. Are you okay?" I smiled weakly. "I don't know. Maybe this is the price of staying silent too long." Evelyn squeezed my hand. "Don't sign anything else. I have a friend in the prosecutor's office. We'll figure this out." I nodded, tears welling up. Her hand was small but warm, pulling me out of the daze. "Thank you," I whispered. "It's been so long since anyone said I'm not alone." Outside, the wind picked up. I sat on the steps and opened my wallet to find my bus ticket. In the middle of the wallet, I saw the receipt for the Estee Lauder foundation Lucas bought yesterday, $54. I let out a dry laugh. How bitter that he would buy the very tool to help me cover the consequences he caused. The bus stopped, and I did not get on. I watched the hurried stream of people, sunlight stretching across the sidewalk. My life had once been as simple as those footsteps, until I let someone else write it for me. Now, maybe it was time to write it myself. When I got home, the afternoon light poured through the windows, gilding the cream-painted walls. The house was too quiet, with only the clock ticking, tick-tick. On the kitchen table, Lucas's coffee cup still held a bit of steam. The smell of cooling coffee mixed with gardenia made my chest ache. I walked to the mirror in the dining room. In it stood a woman upright, lips still swollen, eyes still dark, but something was different. The gaze no longer flinched. I gently wiped the cracked powder from my cheek. Beneath it, the bruise came into sharp relief, like a reminder not to hide anymore. On the table, the statements from Arden and Rowe lay quietly. The sunset hit the edge of the paper, a thin line of light like a flame. I touched it, and a cold sting ran through my fingertips. In the mirror, my hands were shaking, but my back was straight. I looked into my own eyes and said quietly, "No more covering." The words were as soft as breath, yet they rang through the empty house like a bell marking the end of an age of silence. I turned and opened the window. The wind rushed in, carrying the gardenia's fierce, almost defiant scent. I knew a confrontation was coming, but this time I would not stand in the dark. An unexpected phone call from the prosecutor, an invitation to cooperate, and a secret about the old Baxter case began to surface. That afternoon, sunlight poured into my kitchen like diluted honey. The light swept across the cracks on the wall, touched the cold coffee cup, and then dissolved into the space. I was still sitting at the table, my hand resting on the Arden and Rowe file, as if looking away for a second would make it disappear. The clock showed 5:17, the hour when I used to be cooking dinner, chopping onions, and listening to the radio. Now, the house was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Lucas wasn't home yet. Every minute of his absence felt like another breath of freedom. I opened the statements and read each number. Every transfer was a blade slicing through memory. I remembered every time Lucas asked me to sign confirmation forms or tax documents, his arms crossed, his voice firm, "Just sign, Mom. I'll handle the rest." And I signed, out of blind trust, out of fear of upsetting my son. Looking back now, every signature was a piece of evidence against me. The landline rang. The sound felt like a call from another world where I was once confident, capable, and unbowed. I hesitated for a moment before picking up. "Mrs. Davis?" A woman's voice said, calm yet decisive. "This is Sarah Whitmore, prosecutor from the Charleston District Office. I received a referral from Mr. Adrian Castillo at Arden and Rowe. He said you might provide testimony regarding the transactions involving Lucas Davis." My throat went dry. "Yes, but I don't know much. I was just taken advantage of." Sarah's tone remained steady. "I understand. We don't see you as a defendant, but as a witness. However, you'll need to cooperate as soon as possible. It appears this case may be tied to several other accounts, possibly linked to your former firm, Hartwell and Pierce LLP." Hearing that name, I froze. Hartwell and Pierce? What do you mean? "Some of the transferred funds show signs of being laundered through a trust connected to the Baxter v. State case more than a decade ago. We're reopening the files." I sat still. It felt like someone was flipping through an old notebook in my head, page by page. The Baxter case was the biggest of my career, and the first time I learned how to edit the truth. Files omitted, copies altered. I never told anyone. I never thought the ghost of that year would return, dragging my son with it. Sarah continued, "Can you come in tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the district office, 3rd floor? Don't worry, it's just a private meeting." I nodded before realizing I was gripping the phone too tightly. "Yes, I'll come." "Thank you," Sarah said softly, then hesitated. "Mrs. Davis, sometimes justice begins with the courage to say, 'I was wrong too.'" The sentence tightened my chest. When the line went dead, I sat motionless, listening to the wind whistling through the window. I stood and walked toward the mirror in the dining room. The sunset reflected my face, half orange, half gray. Something in the light made me feel small, but not weak. I thought of Sarah's words. Justice begins with acknowledgement. Maybe I had to start with myself. The sound of a key turning echoed through the hall. Lucas was home. I flinched, quickly closing the file. He walked in, shirt untucked, breath faintly smelling of beer. "Have you eaten yet?" he asked, his tone indifferent. "No, I'm not hungry." "I told you you need to eat." He opened the fridge, grabbed a can, and popped it open with a hiss. "I met someone from the bank today. They said someone from Arden and Rowe contacted you." "What's that about?" My heart raced. "They just asked a few questions, nothing important." Lucas turned, eyes fixed on me. "You sure? I don't want you stressed by nonsense." The way he said stressed made me shiver. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yes, it's just administrative. He stared a few seconds longer, then went upstairs. His footsteps on the stairs counted with my heartbeat. I stood still until I heard his door slam, then exhaled. I turned back to the kitchen table, picked up my cup of mint tea, cold and bitter now. But within that bitterness was a faint warmth of determination. I couldn't live like this any longer, afraid, hiding. If Sarah was right, then the Baxter case wasn't just the stain of a law firm, but maybe the root of Lucas's downfall. I had stayed silent while others did wrong, and now that silence had come back to consume my son, I opened my notebook and wrote one short line. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Charleston Prosecutor's Office. No more silence. I folded it, tucked it beneath the tablecloth. Outside, the sun had fully set, leaving behind a pale wash of ink like dusk. In the quiet, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Evelyn. I'll pick you up tomorrow morning. Don't be afraid. We're doing the right thing. I stared at the words for a long time. My eyes blurred, but my lips curved into a smile. Maybe, after all these years, I finally understood what it meant to have someone beside me at the right moment. I turned off the lights and went upstairs. In the hallway mirror, my reflection was a clear woman, aged but no longer evasive. For the first time, I found that image trustworthy. I whispered, "Tomorrow, Helena. Tomorrow. It all begins again." A morning among old files, where justice smells like damp paper and cold coffee, I met the woman who had kept the evidence for 10 years and saw my own face in her story. Have you ever stayed silent out of fear of hurting someone you love? Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to continue this journey with me on Begin Again Stories. The next morning, Charleston was covered in a thin layer of mist, like a veil left behind on the city's shoulders. I woke earlier than usual. Before the sun had even risen, I brewed a cup of mint tea and sat by the window, watching the steam rise and fade into the air. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from knowing that after today, there would be no turning back. Evelyn arrived right at 8. She wore a beige coat, her hair neatly tied, her eyes calm yet steady as they met mine. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. "If I wait any longer, I'll change my mind. Let's go." The car drove along King Street as the city slowly woke up, coffee shops opening, car horns echoing, the scent of baked pastries floating in the wind. I looked out the window and saw my reflection, makeup, no visible bruises like yesterday, only a woman who had decided to stand on the side of truth. The district prosecutor's office was housed in an old 3-story building with red brick walls and white windows. Sarah Whitmore, the prosecutor, met me in the hallway. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s maybe, with brown hair, intelligent, and quiet eyes. "Mrs. Davis, thank you for coming," she said, her voice both firm and warm. "We're re-examining the Baxter case. Some documents suggest a connection to the recent withdrawals made by your son." I asked softly, "You mean the 2011 case?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "That case where Hartwell and Pierce represented Baxter Labs, the pharmaceutical company. You were responsible for organizing internal records, correct?" I nodded. "There's one original file we can't locate in the official court submission," she continued, opening a folder and pulling out a slightly faded color photo. "But someone kept the original copy." The photo made my heart stop. It was of me, sitting in the records room, a folder on the desk labeled "Side Effects Internal Memo." The photo had been taken secretly, with dim lighting, but clear enough to see the Mont Blanc pen in my hand. Who took this?" I asked, my voice rough. "A woman named Mrs. Halloway, a janitor who worked at the firm. She was let go shortly after the Baxter case. Yesterday, we found her at St. Jude's nursing home." Sarah looked up, studying me. "Would you like to see her?" I hesitated. It had been so many years since I'd heard that name, the woman who used to bring me black coffee every morning and sometimes left little notes saying, "Don't work too late." "I would," I said, "but I don't understand. Why would she keep this photo all these years?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Maybe because she knew that one day, someone would need it." We drove to St. Jude's home, about 20 minutes from downtown. The nursing home was small, with yellow walls and a garden scented with lavender. A nurse guided us inside. Mrs. Halloway sat by the window, her hair white, her face wrinkled, but her eyes bright. When she saw me, she smiled, a look of both recognition and sorrow. "I knew you'd come back someday, Helena." Her voice trembled, yet it was still warm as I remembered. I walked closer and held her hand. "You still remember me?" "How could I forget?" she said, looking out the window. "That day, I saw you crying at the records desk. I knew you were doing something you didn't want to do. I took the photo quietly and told no one. I was afraid the truth would disappear. I couldn't speak. The whole room was filled with the scent of lavender and silence. Sarah opened her notebook and asked gently, "Do you know what happened to those documents, Mrs. Halloway?" "I heard, Mr. Hartwell ordered them destroyed. But one copy—" She paused and looked at me. "Helena kept it." I froze. "Me?" "You hid it in a blue envelope, bottom drawer, cabinet number 4 in the old records room. I saw you slip it in that day." My memory flickered like a sudden light. I remembered that afternoon when Mrs. Pierce told me to filter the files. I couldn't throw away the original. I folded it, slipped it into a blue envelope, and tucked it into the bottom drawer. Then the Baxter case ended. I was transferred, and I forgot. Sarah's tone sharpened. "That cabinet, does it still exist?" "I think so. The storage room was never demolished, just moved to a new facility on Hartwell Street." Sarah turned to me, her eyes steady. "If we find that envelope, we can prove the Baxter case was manipulated, and if your son was involved, we'll also have grounds to argue for leniency. But I need you to lead us there." I took a deep breath. The lavender scent reminded me of Walterthe, the man who once said, "Don't let anyone rewrite your truth." I looked at Sarah, then at Mrs. Halloway, and nodded. "I'll go. Whatever's left in that cabinet belongs to justice, not to me." Mrs. Halloway squeezed my hand again. "You know, Helena, some truths are only found when we're old enough not to be afraid anymore." We left St. Jude's close to noon. The air carried the fragrance of lavender mixed with a hint of sea salt. In the car, Sarah spoke softly. "I'll request a light search warrant, but for now, don't tell anyone, especially your son." I nodded, my eyes following the trees rushing backward outside the window. I thought of Lucas, of the way he looked down when he lied, and my heart ached. When we got home, Evelyn walked me to the door and said, "I'll stay nearby. Call me if you need anything." I nodded, watching her figure disappear down the hill. The house was quiet again, filled only with the ticking clock and the scent of gardenias. I sat at the table, took out my notebook, and wrote another line beneath yesterday's entry. "Tomorrow return to Hartwell Street." I closed the notebook and looked at Walter's photograph. His smile in the picture was still as gentle as ever. "Do you see this, Walter? I'm going back to where it all began. But this time, I won't hide." Outside, the late sunlight slanted through the window, casting golden streaks across the table-like paths of light leading the way. A dusty room, a blue envelope hidden in a drawer, and a truth buried for 10 years were about to be revealed. Have you ever gone back to the place that once hurt you just to find the part of yourself you lost? Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe to see the next episode of Begin Again Stories. The next morning, the sky over Charleston hung heavy with clouds. No rain, but the air carried the damp scent of old paper and metal. I put on my gray coat and stepped out of the house, just as the clock struck 8. Evelyn was waiting in the car, engine running, the radio off, leaving only the ticking of the dashboard clock, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. "Are you sure?" she asked slowly. I nodded, gripping the canvas bag holding my notebook. "I've been running from that place for 10 years. It's time to go back." We turned onto Hartwell Street, where the old storage building sat quietly between 2 large warehouses. The sign reading H&P Record Storage was faded, paint peeling off in flakes. I looked at the heavy metal door, and memories rushed back. Late nights I stayed behind, the flickering neon light, the low hum of the air conditioner. This place had once been my world, organized, sealed, unseen. Now it looked like a tomb for forgotten years. Sarah met us at the entrance. She carried a search warrant, white paper stamped with a red seal. "Everything's legal," she said, then turned to the warehouse manager. "Can you open the main records room for us, please?" The man nodded and turned the key in the lock. The sound it made, thick and echoing, was like a door opening for the past. Inside, the air smelled of dust and damp paper. Rows of metal cabinets lined the room, the labels yellowed with age. I ran my hand along one, the dust soft as ash beneath my fingers. I whispered, "Cabinet number 4, at the end of the left row." We walked slowly, each step stirring up a faint cloud of dust. When we reached it, my heartbeat quickened. Cabinet number 4 was at the very bottom, its lock rusted over. I knelt, my hands trembling as I pulled the handle. The cabinet creaked loudly before opening. Inside were stacks of old folders, edges darkened with time. I sifted through the labels, read Case B12, internal memos, Baxter Labs. Nothing unusual, until my fingers brushed against a thin, dusty blue envelope pressed flat at the bottom. I pulled it out. On the corner, written in slanted handwriting, were the words, "Do not discard HD." Sarah leaned closer, whispering, "That's your handwriting?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "It's mine." I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 printed pages and an old USB drive wrapped in plastic. The papers were internal memos from Baxter Labs, dated and signed clearly. The content made my skin crawl. Clinical data shows side effects in elderly patients are 3 times higher. Recommend delaying release and reporting to the FDA. Below that, in red ink, was a handwritten note, "Do not forward. Keep confidential. Await instruction from Hartwell." I heard Evelyn inhale sharply. Sarah froze for a moment, then spoke in a low voice. "This is proof that Baxter concealed trial results. If this is genuine, the entire Baxter v. State case was a legal fraud." My legs felt weak, and I sat down. I had touched this paper 10 years ago, and I had stayed silent. I remembered that day, Mrs. Pierce saying, "Filter out duplicates, Helena. Keep only what benefits us." I did exactly that, and that one harmless act had buried dozens of deaths caused by a faulty drug. Sarah carefully placed the documents into an evidence bag. "This USB may hold the digital versions. I'll have it examined immediately." Then she looked at me, her gaze serious but not cold. "Mrs. Davis, if this checks out, you just saved an entire case and yourself." I said nothing, staring at the open cabinet. The faint light from a high window fell across the swirling dust. In that haze, I saw my younger self typing 10 fingers, believing that following the procedure was enough. Evelyn touched my shoulder. "Are you all right?" I smiled faintly. "I was just thinking, if I had spoken up back then, maybe people wouldn't have died," Sarah said quietly. "What matters is that you're speaking now." We left the storage building close to noon. The sky had begun to clear. Sarah made a call to the forensic lab, her tone firm but laced with emotion. Evelyn walked beside me, silent, glancing at me every few steps as if afraid I might collapse. Before getting into the car, I turned to look at the old building one last time. The metal door shut behind us with a dry, echoing thud. I knew that sound meant the ghosts of the past had just been awakened. On the drive back, Sarah received a call. She listened for a few moments, then said softly, "They've run a quick check. The USB is intact. 17 internal memos match the paper copies. Mrs. Davis, you've just reopened the Baxter case." I leaned back against the seat, my eyes stinging. After all these years, the truth finally had a voice, but at the same time, a new fear crept in. If Lucas really was involved, what awaited him now? Sarah pulled over and turned to me. "I know you're worried about your son, but if you truly want to protect him, the only way is to let justice do its work." I nodded, my voice hoarse. "I don't want to cover for him anymore. I just want him to understand that silence is a crime too." When I got home, the evening light had turned to a deep honey gold. Evelyn left, and I stood alone by the row of gardenias. The wind blew, carrying the scent of flowers mixed with the lingering smell of old paper on my coat. I looked at my hands that had typed millions of words for others, now trembling but free. I walked inside, set my bag on the table, and opened my notebook. June 15, Hartwell Street. The blue envelope, the truth is never lost, only waiting to be found. I closed it and looked up at Walter's photograph. You see, Walter? I finally did the right thing, even if it's late. Outside, the sunset faded. A sparrow darted past the porch, its wings brushing the air like the final punctuation of an old chapter. When truth comes to light, strange phone calls begin to arrive, and the sun in the Mount Pleasant house slowly reveals his true face. Have you ever kept a secret so long that it found its own way to speak? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to catch the next episode of Begin Again Stories. That night, my house seemed to swallow the light. Every lamp was off, except for the pale golden glow of the desk light spreading across the wooden table, where the file lay still, breathing softly like a living thing. I brewed a pot of tea, but my hand trembled so much that water spilled over the rim, spreading into small streaks. The clock ticked, the wind howled outside the porch, and then the phone rang. The sharp sound sliced through the silence like a blade. I looked at the screen. Lucas. I hesitated. Every instinct in me told me not to answer, but I picked up anyway. Mom, his voice was calm, almost gentle. I heard you went to the prosecutor's office. My throat tightened. Who told you? A friend at the courthouse. What were you telling them? He paused, lowering his voice. Or are you trying to destroy me? I took a deep breath. Lucas, this isn't just about you. They're investigating the Baxter case and the joint account. He laughed so softly, yet chillingly. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know what you're doing? They don't care about justice, Mom. They're using you to take me down. No one wants to take you down. You're doing that yourself. There was a long silence. I could hear his breathing through the lines, slow, steady, like someone counting down. You know what? He finally said. I'm disappointed. You chose to trust strangers instead of blood. Blood doesn't give you the right to do wrong. Wrong? His tone sharpened. I'm just fixing the mess you created. If you hadn't been stupid enough to hide those files years ago, I wouldn't have to clean up your garbage now. My heart clenched. You know what I did? I know everything. His voice turned cold. You think I didn't read the old Hartwell and Pierce records? That blue envelope you hid for 10 years is proof you helped cover up the data. You committed a crime, Mother. And now you pretend to be righteous? I stood and walked to the window, staring into the thick darkness. You've been watching me? No, he chuckled. I just know how to find things. You don't understand this world. One picture, one old email, all it takes to destroy someone's reputation. I heard myself whisper, almost to no one, You're threatening me. No, Mom. I'm reminding you who's in control here. His voice was slow, deliberate, each word falling like drops of molten iron. If you keep cooperating with Sarah Whitmore, I'll send those scans to the press. You'll become the old woman who covered up a death case for money. Do you want to die humiliated like that? I didn't answer. Part of me wanted to hang up. Another part wanted to scream. But I just stood still, listening to the same child I once held in my arms, the one who cried when his father died, now speaking to me like an executioner. Lucas, I finally said, my voice low but firm. If you think I'll be afraid, you're wrong. I've been afraid for 3 years. Not anymore. The line went silent. Then came a laugh, cold as ice. You think you're strong? You're just a 61-year-old woman living in a house I allow you to keep. If I want, by tomorrow you'll have nothing. I smiled faintly. This house is mine, Lucas. Your name on the deed is a forgery. I've spoken with an attorney. You have no rights here anymore. This time he said nothing. Then came a loud bang, maybe his hand hitting the table. You dare, he shouted. You dare go against me? No, Lucas, I said softly. I'm just choosing to stand on the right side. The line went dead. I stared at the screen. The call had ended. My hands shook, and cold sweat formed on my forehead. Inside me, the fear was still there, but something else had formed beside it. A solid stillness, as if I had just crossed a line I could never go back from. I sat down, looking up at the ceiling. The desk light still glowed, casting a trembling reflection on the wall. I suddenly thought of Waltariff. If he were alive, he would say, "Don't let the dark take your home." I stood and turned on every light in the room. Brightness filled the space, pushing the shadows back. I saw my wedding photo on the shelf, the silver frame slightly tilted. I straightened it, and in that moment, I realized Walter's gentle smile seemed to be urging me on. The phone buzzed again. A new message. "You'll regret betraying me, Elle." I deleted it immediately, refusing to let myself reread it. Then I opened my notebook and wrote another line beneath the others. June 15, after the conversation with the dark. No more trembling, no more hiding. Outside, the wind howled louder. A door somewhere slammed, then silence. I sat down, lifted the cold cup of tea, and drank it all. The mint was bitter, sharp, but as it went down, my throat grew warm. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights spill across the porch. Every car that passed brought a slice of memory. Lucas's laughter, his small hand as a boy, his proud eyes on graduation day. I whispered, "I can't save you anymore, but I will save myself." Near dawn, the first sparrow sang. I drew the curtains, turned off the lights, and let the house sink into the pale blue glow of morning. Inside me, a clear resolve had formed. I would no longer let Lucas define me by fear. When the evidence reached the prosecutor's office, the media began to leak the story, and Helena was faced with a choice: reveal everything or trade away what peace remained. If someone you love becomes your threat, would you choose silence or stand up? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the next episode of Begin Again Stories. 3 days later, Charleston's morning was covered in a white blur of fog. I was watering the gardenias on the porch when the mailman stopped. He handed me a thick brown envelope, embossed with the seal of the Charleston County District Attorney's Office. I took it with trembling hands. The envelope felt cold, the paper heavy, as if it carried the weight of fate itself. Inside was a short letter signed by Sarah Whitmore, Mrs. Helena Davis. The District Attorney's Office officially confirms that the documents you provided have been verified and match the missing data from Baxter versus Estate. You will be classified as a protected witness, not a defendant. However, the media has begun approaching the file. If any journalist contacts you, please do not respond. We will issue an official statement within 72 hours. Sincerely, Sarah Whitmore. I read it 3 times. Every word pierced like both salvation and warning. I had told the truth, and now the truth was about to walk into the light. The landline rang. I almost knew who it was before answering. "Mrs. Davis?" Sarah's voice came fast and urgent. "There's been a leak from the court. A reporter from the Charleston Herald just contacted me. They have a copy of the photo of you in the archive. I need you to stay calm and not respond to anyone." "What photo?" I asked softly, though I already knew. "One of you is holding the side effects file. It may have come from inside Hartwell and Pierce. Someone sold it." I sank into the chair, feeling the ground crack beneath me. The image of me 10 years ago, dark hair, focused face, holding a forbidden file, was about to appear on the front page. Sarah's tone softened. "This is the first step of a public battle. I know you're tired, but please trust me. When truth surfaces, they'll attack you. But in the end, justice will stand on the right side." I whispered, "I've been silent too long, Sarah. If this is the price, I'm ready." When I hung up, I sat still, staring at Walter's photo on the wall. The morning light slanted across the frame, making his eyes seem alive, watching me. I murmured, "I'm not hiding anymore, my love. Even if they drag my name through the mud, at least I'll breathe again." That afternoon, the news broke. The front page of the Charleston Herald read, "Baxter v. State Files. Missing evidence found by former Secretary Helena Davis." Sources confirmed that the original documents, hidden for 10 years, could expose Hartwell and Pierce to obstruction of justice charges. Below was my photograph. Dim lighting, my shadow leaning over the file. The caption read, "Helena Davis, the woman who kept Baxter's secret." I read it with a strange mix of disbelief and fear. Each word seemed to pull me further from the ordinary life I had tried to hold on to. The phone rang again. Not Sarah this time, but a man's voice. "Mrs. Davis? I'm Tom Reynolds with WCHN News. We'd like to interview you about your role in the Baxter case. Just a few minutes to give you the chance to tell your side of the story." I froze. A chance to tell my side, but in this world, who listens to the truth from a 61-year-old woman? "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I have nothing to say," and hung up. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Then again, and again. Neighbors glanced my way when I stepped out for the mail, their eyes filled with curiosity and pity. 2 cars are parked outside the gate. A young reporter stood there, microphone in one hand, recorder in the other. "Mrs. Davis," she called out, "do you regret hiding the files? Is it true your son was involved in laundering money through Arden and Rowe?" I shut the gate and went back inside. Once the door closed, I leaned against it, breathing hard. For the first time in years, I realized I could no longer stay invisible. That night, I didn't turn on the lights. The glow from my laptop was the only thing illuminating the room. I scrolled through dozens of comments under the article. Some wrote, "She was just a pawn being used." Others said, "If she stayed silent for 10 years, she's guilty too." I stopped at one short comment, "At least she finally spoke." I smiled. One sentence was enough to outweigh 1,000 others. Just then, a new email appeared from Lucas Davis. Subject, "Congratulations, Mom, you're famous." I opened it. "Does the press make you proud? You've won. Your justice killed your own son. I hope you sleep well knowing you've just pushed me toward prison." The last line made my throat tighten. "Just like you once buried lives for money, now you're hiding your guilt by ruining me. But don't worry, I still have a few cards left." I read it through and didn't reply. My hands felt ice cold. Lucas didn't understand that truth isn't something to win or lose. I closed the laptop, poured more tea, and watched the steam rise, white smoke like fading memories, but the mint scent remained. The next morning, Sarah called again. "You all right?" "All right, if all right means still breathing," I said. She chuckled softly, her voice gentle. "I know this is hard, but we have progress. The federal court has opened an investigation into Hartwell and Pierce. They want you as the primary witness." I was silent. Sarah added, "Truth has a price, Helena, but if you stand firm, it will give back what silence took from your dignity." When she hung up, I stepped onto the porch. The morning light spilled across the steps, warm and thin like linen drying in the Sunday. I sat down, hands on my knees, feeling the wind move. In that wind I heard Walter's voice, the voice of conscience, of the husband long gone. "No one is saved by lies." I nodded slightly, as if he were sitting beside me. That afternoon, as the gate closed behind me, I knew I had paid the first price for truth, losing peace but reclaiming myself. When the envelope bearing Lucas's name arrived, Helena would face the deepest pain of all, the hatred of the son she had once sacrificed everything for. Do you believe that a mother's love can survive betrayal? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the next episode of Begin Again Stories. Saturday morning, Charleston was unusually quiet. Sunlight slid through the magnolia trees, scattering into patches across the porch. I was making tea when there was a knock on the door. 3 steady, deliberate knocks. It was the mailman. He bowed slightly and handed me a thick envelope, the corner stamped with the words, "South Carolina Department of Corrections." I stared at that line for a long time. In my mind, Sarah's voice echoed, "If Lucas reaches out, don't respond immediately. Let reason lead before your heart." But my heart, worn thin by years of loss, trembled at the sight of my son's handwriting in the corner. Lucas Davis, inmate number 27495, Sumter Correctional Facility. I opened the envelope carefully with my fingertips. The paper smelled faintly of metal and confinement, cold and sterile like a prison cell's breath. The first line stopped me cold. "Mom, I hate you, but I can't stop missing you." I sat down by the window. Light fell across the paper, revealing faint ink smudges, perhaps fingerprints or tears. "I don't know where to start. Here, they only call me by a number. No one cares who I was. They call me the traitor accountant, the ungrateful son. But in my head, there's still one voice, yours. When I was 10, after I fell off my bike and you said, "It's okay, get up, I'm right here. Mom, I want to believe you're still here, even if it's just to hate me." I set the letter down and drew a deep breath. Outside, a sparrow fluttered on the fence, knocking a few gardenia petals onto the tiles. The world was so still I could hear my heartbeat slow, heavy, carrying an ancient sorrow. I kept reading. "I know you think I'm a monster. Maybe you're right. But do you know why I started managing your money? It wasn't greed, it was fear. Fear of losing everything. When Dad died, I watched you cry all night. I saw you tremble, counting bills, paying rent. I swore I'd grow up and make sure you never worried again, but life taught me something cruel. Love without power gets crushed. So I chose power and lost everything else." The voice in his writing echoed like a confession, not a plea for forgiveness. "Mom, every night when the lights go out, I see your face. The last time I hit you, I remember it clearly. I don't even know why I did it. I just remember the smell of your soup, but a familiar wave of rage rises for no reason. I threw the bowl, and then my hand did something I can never undo. When you fell, I felt fear, but I still walked away because I couldn't bear to see myself weak. I touched the ink stain on the page right after the word weak. A tear fell onto my hand. I couldn't tell if it was his or mine. I'm not writing to ask forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But Sarah Whitmore visited me yesterday. She said you're still living in the old house, still growing gardenias, still making mint tea every morning. I'm glad you found peace. But she also said the Baxter case isn't over. They want to reopen it, and you might get pulled in because of the old records. I don't want that to happen. If anyone asks, tell them I forced you. I did everything. Let me take the blame." I gripped the letter tightly. A mother's love is a strange thread that frays, but it stretches, always trying to mend itself, even if it bleeds. "Mom, I have a copy of everything I took from your house. The originals are with my lawyer. If I die and in here, that happens often, she'll send them all to you. I don't mean to scare you. I just want you to know I still believe you're innocent. And I miss the old kitchen, the sound of boiling water, and the smell of your apple pie. In here, everything is tasteless except memories." The letter ended there. No signature, only a final scrawl. "I'm still Lucas, your son, even if you don't want me to be." I folded the letter, but my hands refused to close it. A breeze came through the window, fluttering the edge of the paper. I watched it, feeling as if I were watching my son's soul suspended between two worlds, one of guilt, the other of yearning for forgiveness. That afternoon, I brought the letter to Sarah. She read it silently, then looked up. "He's trying to take the blame to protect you. Do you want us to submit this as mitigating evidence?" I shook my head. "No, it's a son's confession, not a plea. Keep it private for me." Sarah looked at me for a long time. "You know, people will call you a foolish mother." I smiled wearily. "Maybe so. But a mother is only truly foolish when she stays silent in the face of evil, even when that evil wears her child's face." That night, I took Lucas's framed photo from the shelf. His graduation picture, bright smile and eyes full of promise. I wiped the dust from the glass and set it beside the letter. The desk lamp cast a soft glow over them, turning the two objects into fragments of the same memory. Pride and pain. I lit a small candle, placed it next to the frame, and whispered, "My son, I won't save you with lies anymore. If you want redemption, earn it with truth." The candle flame flickered, and its trembling light danced on the wall like a small hand waving goodbye. That night, I wrote in my notebook, June 22, the letter from Sumter Prison. Some ties, even when broken, still pull your heart toward the past. But I know, to keep living, I must learn to love without chains. Outside, the night wind passed through the window, carrying the distant sound of a train whistle. It lingered thin, like a farewell between two worlds. When the day of the trial came, Helena would have to stand in court, face her son, and confront the past itself, where truth and motherhood no longer had boundaries. The day of the trial arrived, and Charleston was wrapped in a thick gray fog, as if the entire city was holding its breath. I wore a charcoal dress, simple but neat, and pinned a small gardenia brooch to my chest, which still bloomed beneath my porch through every storm. Evelyn drove. Sarah sat in the back seat, clutching a thick folder. No one spoke the entire drive, only the sound of the wipers tapping steadily against the windshield, like the rhythm of my heartbeat. When the car stopped in front of the Charleston Federal Court, I looked up at the towering gray stone steps. The great doors stood open, the white columns rising like gatekeepers of justice. I had been here hundreds of times as a secretary for Hartwell and Pierce, walking in and out of hearings without ever imagining that one day I'd stand here as a witness against my own son. The courtroom was bright but cold. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long streaks across the floor like the boundary between guilt and redemption. Lucas sat at the defendant's table, dressed in an orange prison uniform, his hands cuffed at his waist. It took me several seconds to recognize the son I once held in my arms, now a man hollow-eyed, gaunt, and bowed. Sarah placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Stay calm. Just tell the truth. Nothing more, nothing less." Judge Ortega entered with his silver hair and solemn face, both familiar and steady. I had delivered case files to him dozens of times in the past. He once smiled at me and said, "Miss Davis, the only woman who keeps my ledgers clean." When his eyes met mine, there was a brief pause, a small nod. Then he turned away. The trial began. The prosecutor rose, his voice clear and firm. The defendant, Lucas Davis, is charged with embezzling $130,000, laundering money through family accounts, threatening a witness, and committing domestic assault. The primary witness, Mrs. Helena Davis. My heart tightened as my name echoed across the room. Sarah gestured for me to take the stand. Each step forward felt like walking through the echo of my own past, the sound of my shoes on the wooden floor matching the beat of old memories. "Mrs. Davis," the prosecutor began, "can you describe, in your own words, what happened when your son began controlling your finances?" I nodded slightly. "It started 3 years ago, after Lucas divorced. He moved back in with me, saying it would only be temporary. I thought he needed time to recover. But somehow, he turned my home into his, and me into his servant." I paused, swallowing hard. When I realized it, my entire retirement account had already been transferred into his name. I told them about the nights of shouting, of humiliation, the bowl of vegetable soup with no salt, the shattered dish, the blood on the kitchen floor. The courtroom was silent. Only the scratching of the court clerk's pen could be heard. "And after that?" the prosecutor asked. I knew I had to escape. I met with Ms. Sarah Whitmore and submitted evidence that Lucas used my accounts to transfer company funds. I also turned over documents connected to Baxter, the same ones my son used to blackmail me. A murmur rippled through the room. Lucas's lawyer stood abruptly. "Objection! She's trying to link unrelated charges to prejudice the jury against my client." Judge Ortega raised a hand. "Noted, but the statement will stand as part of the overall record. Proceed." I glanced at Lucas. His eyes met mine, no longer angry, just hollow and bitter. He whispered something to his lawyer. The prosecutor nodded to me. "Mrs. Davis, can you confirm this is the handwritten letter from the defendant, sent from Sumter Correctional Facility?" I looked at the paper in his hand, recognizing Lucas's handwriting immediately. I nodded. "Yes." In this letter, the defendant admits to transferring funds and offers to take full blame. "Do you wish to comment on that?" I took a deep breath. My voice trembled but stayed clear. "I don't want anyone to take the blame for me. But I want the court to know I raised my son on trust, not fear. My mistake was believing that love could fix everything. Blind love doesn't save. It only allows evil to grow in silence." The room fell still. Even Judge Ortega bowed his head slightly. Lucas's attorney rose again, desperate to regain control. "Mrs. Davis, do you recall being the records custodian for the Baxter, the same case you admitted to procedural errors in?" Are you using this trial to cleanse your own past? I looked him straight in the eye. I was wrong. I signed things I didn't read. I trusted people I shouldn't have. But this time, I chose not to stay silent. I'm not here to cleanse anything. I'm here to return the truth to those who died, and to myself. For a moment, the entire courtroom was silent. Then Judge Ortega gently tapped his gavel. That's enough. The witness may step down. As I turned to return to my seat, Lucas suddenly stood. "Mom!" he shouted. "What do you get out of this? Applause? Do you know how long I'll be in prison because of you?" The guards rushed forward, holding him by the shoulders. I turned to face him, the boy who had once been my whole world, now thrashing in fury. "My son," I said quietly, "this is a consequence, not a punishment." Judge Ortega waited for the noise to subside, then read the interim ruling. Given the severity of the offenses, the clear financial evidence, and the threats made to the witness, the court orders that the defendant, Lucas Davis, be held without bail until sentencing. The gavel struck. A short sound, yet it reverberated through my chest like a bell ending a long era of fear. As people began to file out, Judge Ortega passed by me, paused, and said softly, "I once owed you thanks for your honesty in all those years of work. Today, I return that gratitude not for your profession, but for your courage." I smiled through the blur of tears. "Thank you, Your Honor. Perhaps justice was never gone, only waiting." Outside, the fog had begun to lift. Light shimmered across the stone steps like tears. I walked down slowly, taking a deep breath. Evelyn waited at the bottom, taking my hand. "You did it," she said. I nodded gently. "Not yet. There's still sentencing, still long nights ahead. But at least, today, I told the truth." The sea breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of salt and warmth, like a quiet promise that peace would come even if slowly. After the trial, Helena decided to sell the house that held too many shadows, to leave Charleston and begin again somewhere by the sea, in the light, where she could finally live as a free woman, no longer anyone's mother, no longer anyone's victim. I left the courthouse that day in the pale gold light of late afternoon and realized something. There are roads that, once walked, can never be retraced, even if you once called them home. Charleston, the place that had been my entire life, now felt like a thin skin stretched over an unhealed scar. A week later, I placed the for sale notice on the oak, the one Walter built by hand, its surface worn from years of files and teacups. The paper was small, the words simple. 2-story home for sale, Mount Pleasant, south-facing near the bay. When the agent, Mr. Thompson, arrived, he looked around and said, "This house has a soul, you know." I smiled. "I know. But sometimes you have to leave an old soul behind to find new breath." He nodded and didn't ask more. I spent the whole afternoon packing. Each object was a fragment of my life. The curtains Walter bought in our first year, the painting Lucas drew when he was 8, the tea set Sarah gave me for my 60th birthday. Some things I wrapped to give away, some I threw out even as my hands trembled. I opened the filing, the one once filled with documents, evidence, and fear. Now it held only a small notebook and Lucas's letter from Sumter Prison. I placed them in a box and labeled it, "Keep because I lived." As evening fell, sunlight slipped through the window, laying long streaks across the floor like time itself. I looked around the empty room, listening to the wind through the window frame, smelling the mix of old paint and mint tea. I didn't cry. My heart simply felt like a lake finally cleared of moss. The next day, I met Evelyn at a small cafe near the Ravenel Bridge. She placed an envelope in front of me. "I spoke with Sarah. She wants you to know Lucas is doing well in rehabilitation. He might get a reduced sentence." I nodded, staring at the steam rising from my cappuccino. "I'm glad for him, but I can't stay here, Evelyn. Every street, every church bell reminds me. Where will you go? Savannah maybe, or a coastal town somewhere, a place with wind, silence, and no one who knows who I used to be." Evelyn held my hand gently. "You deserve that peace." The sale was finalized a month later. When the buyer finished signing, I noticed the Mont Blanc pen was the same model as the first one I ever used at Hartwell and Pierce. Life moves in strange circles. The tool that once opened a chapter now closes it. I signed my name firmly, Helena M. Davis. On the day I handed over the keys, a light rain fell over Charleston. I walked one last round through the house. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the incense I'd lit the night before. The photo of Walter and Lucas was already off the wall, leaving behind only a small nail hole, like the sharp ache in my chest as I signed that final paper. I stepped onto the porch and looked out at the garden where I had grown gardenias. This season they bloomed late. A few white blossoms still clung to the branches, trembling in the rain. I bent down, cut one, and slipped it into my coat pocket. Not to carry the past, but to remind myself that even battered by storms, they still bloomed. When I left, I didn't lock the door. The new owners would arrive that afternoon, bringing their own lives with them. I simply closed it gently, as if tucking away a dream. On the road to Savannah, I stopped at a gas station outside the city. Next to the counter was a small bakery selling apples, the kind I used to make for Walter every Thanksgiving. The scent of cinnamon and butter froze me in place. The young cashier smiled and asked, "Traveling far?" "Yes," I said, "farther than I ever thought I could." I bought 2 slices, one for me, one for the one who was gone. Then I drove on, down long roads lined with falling leaves, while the radio played softly, "What a Wonderful World." By late afternoon, the Welcome to Savannah sign appeared, and the sky broke open with sunlight. It streamed through the windshield, golden as honey. I rolled the window down and let the ocean air rush in. The salt touched my lips, and I was alive. I rented a small white cottage near Tybee Bay, with a window facing a row of magnolia trees. The owner, an elderly woman named Ruth with cloud-white hair, smiled when I told her I was from Charleston. "In Savannah," she said, "people come to forget the past and somehow find themselves instead." That night, I opened the window, listening to the distant surf and the crickets in the garden. On the table, I placed a cup of mint tea, my old notebook, and Walter's photograph. Beside it lay the gardenia from Charleston. I wrote, "August 12, Savannah. Sold the house, bought the sky. Traded fear for freedom, the past for breath." Maybe happiness isn't about having a home to live in, but having a place to return to yourself. I closed the notebook, leaned back in the chair, and looked out the window. The moon shimmered across the sea, breaking into 1,000 silver fragments. In that moment, I understood. Every time you let go of something you once loved, you don't lose it. It's just making room for peace. The Savannah night was gentle and still, as if it knew I had just come through the storm. I closed my eyes, listening to the waves and the wind weave together for the first time in 40 years, and I slept without dreams. The next morning in Savannah, Helena received an unexpected letter from Sarah and Lucasiewicz with a different message, but both reminding her that sometimes justice isn't about punishment, but about learning to live kindly with our memories. On my first morning in Savannah, sunlight spilled through the window like liquid honey, glimmering across the table where my cup of mint tea still steamed. The ocean breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of salt and the cries of seagulls, soft but enough to make me smile. The little cottage was quiet, filled only with the ticking of the clock and the distant rhythm of the waves. Everything here was slow, gentle, and real, as if time itself wanted to give me another chance. On the table were 2 envelopes, one white, one pale blue. Both had been neatly placed at my doorstep this morning. I recognized the handwriting immediately as Sarah Whitmore. The other, smaller and shakier, was from Lucas. I opened Sarah's letter first. "Helena, I'm writing this as the case of Baxter v. State officially closes. Today, Hartwell and Pierce have had their licenses revoked, and the federal court recognized the documents you provided as decisive evidence. I don't know what else to say except thank you. You've saved dozens of people, and the honor of those who once believed in this law. I also wanted you to know that in the final hearing, someone asked me to pass along a message. Tell my mother I understand now. I didn't have to ask who it was. I knew you would." I set the letter down. The sunlight tilted, casting my shadow on the wall, thin, calm, and still. I opened the other envelope, my hand trembling slightly. The paper smelled faintly of soap and age, like memories washed clean. Mom, today I'm allowed to write. Not because my sentence was reduced, but because I volunteered for the prison's counseling program. They said we have to learn to face those we've hurt, at least with words. I miss the old house. I miss your kitchen. I keep thinking about what you said in court. Blind love saves no one. I understand now. I thought I was protecting you, but really, I was just trying to make you smaller so I could feel bigger. Here, no one cares who I am, but maybe that's how I finally learned what you've always known. Freedom doesn't come from control, it comes from letting go. If one day I ever get out, I'll come to Savannah only if you allow it. Your son, Lucas. I set the letter down and looked toward the bay. The morning light streamed through the curtain, thin as silk. I didn't cry. Tears had dried long ago, but inside, something opened, slow and warm, like a gardenia blooming late in the rain. I brewed another cup of tea, pouring it into the green-glazed ceramic mug Ruth had given me when I moved in. Every morning she passed by my window, waving and saying, "Morning, sunshine, today's a good day to start again." I smiled, repeating the phrase silently, a good day to start again. Begin with two simple words. But it took me 61 years to understand them. I carried both letters out to the porch. Outside, the Savannah sea shimmered like silver. A neighborhood child rode by on his bike and waved. I waved back, then opened my notebook that had followed me through every chapter of this journey. The last page was still blank. I wrote, September 30, Savannah. Justice isn't an ending. It's the point where we learn to forgive without stepping back. I once thought freedom meant no one could hurt me anymore. But now I know freedom is when you can open your heart again, even knowing it's been broken before. I set the pen down and looked up at the sky. White clouds drifted slowly, mirrored in the water below. A heron flew past, its wings long and steady. In that moment, I thought of everyone who had crossed my path: Walter with his gentle smile, Lucas with his defiant eyes, Sarah with her courage, Evelyn with her quiet loyalty. Each of them had left a mark on my soul. I would never want to smooth away. In the afternoon, I walked along the bay. Children were flying kites, and elderly men played chess under the magnolia trees. I stopped beside a wooden bench engraved with the words, "Dedicated to those who dared to begin again." I placed the dried gardenia I'd brought from Charleston on the bench and whispered, "Thank you for letting me begin." The sun sank over the bay, casting gold and orange light over rooftops, over the water, over my hair. The ocean breeze brushed past, soft as an old friend's goodbye. I could almost feel Walter somewhere nearby, smiling that same kind smile, and in that instant, I knew I was home, not in a house of wood, but in the one inside my heart. That night, I turned on the lamp and sat by the window, listening to the steady hum of the waves. I switched on the radio, and Blue Skies played. The voice was warm and mellow, like time itself melting away. I took a sip of tea, leaned back, and smiled. In this life, there are chapters you can't rewrite, but you can always keep writing. And that's all I needed to learn at 61. Every loss carries the shape of a new beginning. I closed the window and lit a candle on the table. The flame flickered, its light reflecting off the two letters lying side by side, one of justice, one of love. I let their edges touch, like two halves of the same story. Then I wrote the final line in my notebook. I am Helena Davis. I have lived, lost, and stood back up. And tomorrow, I will brew tea, open the door, and smile at the new sky. Because it is never too late to begin again. Have you ever had to face your past to reclaim your own freedom? If Helena's story reminds you of a chapter in your own life, leave a comment, share where you're listening from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories from Begin Again Stories, where every beginning is possible, no matter your age.